Welcome back. As I'm sure you'll all agree, there's some absolutely fascinating discussions, and what we'll do now is take some questions, because as I say, these sages of the med have answers. Have we got a roving mic, or shall we just, there's not that many of us, so we could just yell them out. Anyone want to start the questions off? Annette, I can see you there. Okay, what would you like to ask?
I'd like just to make a couple of observations. For a start, I'm going to thank you guys.
We need a mic, I think.
I need you to really yell, because we can't.
I've read in a place, in a situation where every single word that was said, I wanted to jump in with my own feelings.
Can we use a mic also
Here
for
we
the
go.
cameras?
It's working,
that
yeah.
Everything is recorded.
First and foremost, welcome to Gibraltar. I'm a native, 10th generation Gibraltarian. Rarely have I been in a position, in a place, in a moment where I've wanted to join into the conversation at every single moment with trepidation, with my own ideas, with my own experiences of what you've been talking about. Thank you so very much. In a way, you've come to a place which somehow embodies a lot of the things that you've been saying. We are, in Gibraltar, what I call the invisible people. We have been here for 300 years, but nobody has seen us. And what that has given me as a person, as a 64-year-old person, is to be able to have the ability to have looked at the world in all its aspects, in a way as a defense mechanism, because I've always been on the defense, because we've always been an invisible people, from our masters, from our foes, from everybody. And the only way we've been able to survive is by opening windows. The old people in Gibraltar say, whenever a window is closed in our face, another window opens for us. And the only way we do it is by using our little grey cells, because we have nothing else. We have no natural resources. We have not even fishing when we're surrounded by water. The only thing we have in our favor, or whatever, if you call it a favor, is our little grey cells, which means that you've continually got to think of outside the box. Outside the box means hedging your bets all the time, hoping against hope that what you've thought about will be good enough, but always having a contingency plan just in case. It's been interesting because in a way we are isolated, but never been isolated through trade, through travel, through commerce, and now through artificial intelligence, through the internet. It's given us access to all sorts of things. It's given me personally, as a human being, an access to a very important development. A development that's been done by families. A development that's been happening for the last 10 years, where a group of families from around the world got together to solve a problem. And we did it through the medium of the internet, through Facebook, through all sorts of things. Is to solve a problem of an incurable disease, which our members of our family had, which we were told could never happen, where the pharmaceutical companies were not interested in, because there's only about 500,000 people in the whole world that might have it. It's not commercially interesting. So because it was not commercially interesting, and because some families found out of researchers that were working on it as a sideline, we said, well, we're not going to sit down and do nothing about it. We're going to do something about it. And what we've done is, over 10 years, with about between $20 and $30 million, funded something that, as from next year, we're just starting trials on replacing a genetic fault in the brain. And we've done it as a group of families. We have the researchers are working for us. The companies biotech companies who are coming in are coming for us. We've set our own biotech company up, and the dividends for that biotech company is not money, is results. Now, if we've done it as a group of families with very little knowledge, anyone can.
So
you just need to want to do it. We were told we were mad, we were told it could not happen, but we've used the method, a vehicle. We've used the Google vehicle, we've used Facebook vehicle, we've used internet vehicle, we've used it as a vehicle. Yeah, fine, they're having trillions of pounds, but that's not our interest. Our interest is curing these people.
So you're saying that that could only happen really somewhere like Gibraltar?
No, it wasn't so much Gibraltar.
Okay.
What it did is, as a Gibraltarian, as being on my own, on a tiny little bit of land, and cut off perhaps from what was happening in Chicago, what was happening in Miami, what was happening
so
here.
So you were connected by...
But I was connected. I was connected to that. All it took was one winter afternoon at work, stabbing at a computer of which I had very little knowledge of, with the name of the syndrome, and finding, oh, this family has just started this. Right, what are you doing? I'm doing this. Why? Because we found this out. How can we help? Right, let's get together. Let's do this.
So maybe we could ask the panel something about the power of small states, or what role small
It's
states...
the power, I think beyond the power of small states is
Well, I'd
the
like to
power
bring
of
John
people.
Mark in, because he's a sort of small state specialist, as it were. Did your PhD on small states? So
Exactly. So yeah, I worked on small state security. International relations theories are being developed for great powers. So if you compare the United States and Luxembourg or Gibraltar, you might see that there are differences in terms of, say, foreign policy power. And so I was interested in these issues for a very long time. The power of small states, I mean, most small states are very successful because there is the issue of scale. I lived in 10 different countries, and most of them small states. I live in Iceland, in Qatar, in the UAE. And what you see in that kind of small state is that there is a sense of community. If you go to Iceland, it was I think one of the football player, the Icelandic team, said 98% of Icelanders were in front of the TV to watch the game, and the rest, the 2%, were on the field. And that's this sense of community that you can have when you're in small states. Now, when you grow bigger, you have economy of scales that makes that kind of bounds impossible. And so, what technology managed to do is aggregate people with similar concerns. And the fact that you are here and basically can actually connect with people that have a similar interests in the rest of the world, this is a very powerful function of social media and technology. And this can lead to very positive outcome. This whole issue of crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, this is transformative. That's correct. And I think that it's not only small states. This day, it's people that are well organized, that share a common interest. They can move forward.
If I can just jump in for building on that one. There are three things which I think is so important. And to distinguish what you just mentioned, it's not we need technology or not. It's not neither or. It's a question is, what position has technology in our life? And what I hear from you is that we took the initiative. We took the initiative and looking for tools which enable us to find solutions for what we were looking for. And that is exactly, the prioritization. First of all, why are we doing this? What is our intention? What is our attitude? And what kind of tools are out there which we can use inside of us and outside of us? And how we're going to use this. I think that is very important. Understanding the power of humans is also, I was, 8 weeks ago, I was in India. And I was in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad, at the place where Gandhi was working, or at that time. And for me, it was interesting when I was walking around there. Interesting to understand at that time There was no mobile phone, there was no internet, there was even barely telephones. And writing a letter took about 6 or 8 weeks or even longer to go to Europe or America or somewhere. So, but still, he was communicating to a lot of people on a different channel. So I was like, okay, so is technology in all the sense how we use it right now really something, or are we just, you know, not knowing what our capacities are because we are not looking at it and using instead the easy way, you know, the telephone way. You know, the easiest way, if you have children and they have mobile phones and sometimes, you know, you're part of the conversation which they have with their peers, you'll think about, is that really, you know, when I was in my age, when we didn't have a telephone, would I write a letter upon those topics to the person? So the neuroscientific effect is that you just, without thinking, just doing something. You know, when you're writing a letter, you had to think about what's important. You had to try to find out what is the other position, what does he or she, in which kind of situation is he or she is. What do I want to express? That are neuroscientific kind of steps which you have to go and how to train your brain. That is no longer that's no longer in use right now. So I think to have an understanding of this, how and where do I use technology? And on the smaller states, on the smaller countries, there is an initiative which came up. The main driver of it is a friend of mine, Lorenzo Fioramonti. Is a professor for politics and economics at South Africa, Pretoria University. And we were together in Bhutan about 2 years ago, and we came up and said, well, why not creating a well-being 7, a We 7 club instead of the G7? The G7, you all guys know, they're coming together and trying to find out what is the economy of scale and how do we materialize the best way and how can we facilitate growth on a material level. But here we said what is needed is to come and accumulate and bring together politicians who think about material wealth is not the only way how to measure success. We need to find different ways. And there are countries and governments who are doing that already. Inside America, I think there is Oregon and Maryland who are also embedding another measurement than GDP. There is Bhutan, of course, there is Costa Rica, there are others. And last year in October, we managed to have a first conference in Edinburgh. Invited the Scottish government they were inviting policymakers. There was the president from Slovenia, I think, was there. There was a chief economist officer of New Zealand was there. There were people from Bhutan there. And this is the new way of thinking, bringing those people together. Not saying we need somebody who creates us and present us a solution, but bring people together and said, there might be something else. And let's explore that. Let's find that out. What does it mean for us? Maybe it doesn't apply for us, what Bhutan is doing, but maybe it does, and maybe in some way. Maybe they can learn from us. So let's create this forum of smaller states, and I think smaller states are very powerful. They can do things, and they can make decisions. And they can really create a shift and the initiation of the world where we need the world to go, or we want the world to go. So that's...
Let's take another question, and well, unless you guys want to...
Well, I just wanted to say, actually, to is it Annette? Yeah. I think, thank you for that, because I think you know, just coming at it from a different perspective, you've beautifully, I think, articulated why I remain hopeful on most days. Because there is no algorithm for love, right? Your motivating force was love, because it was your family, people in your family, in your extended family, that drove you to find a solution for that. And I think it's very important that we never forget that that creative capacity that we all have, all of us have, sets us apart, and there's no technology and there's no machine that can replicate that. I think that's very important for us to keep front and center of our minds. And not lose our connection, and going back to the connection to self. That's what is eroded when we give our agency to artificial intelligence, which is probably an oxymoron anyway, I think. So thank you, that was nice.
So another question? Oh, Peter's got one. Oh, he's got the mic as well.
Good morning, panel. I just wanted to touch on what you were talking about earlier on, where we're abdicating more of our critical thinking and our memories to the internet and the World Wide Web. what does the panel think of the net neutrality issues that are going on in the States at the moment and the recent European legislations, Article 11 to 13, that have been passed, which are more copyright? But how does the panel see that affecting how everyone interacts with each other? Because if we have to start paying for our access, doesn't that create a tiered society? And how do we avoid that?
Paul, your turn.
Yeah, so yes, I agree. But I think also we have to be a little bit cautious about being really clearly ideologically attached to one way of being and another. So I generally tend towards a libertarian perspective when it comes to the internet and where things go. But as Jean-Marc will tell you, these technologies we need to understand as a society how we can contain and control some of the worst excesses that come through, because if we exist in a society that is segregated and determined by money, then money accumulates, and those that have the money and the access can use the free internet to accumulate more power and influence. I mean, that's not a direct answer to your question, because your question actually is in the US case about net neutrality, the way in which the regulation is being relaxed, it plays into the hands of those that are able to accumulate more power, and that's dangerous. But so I'm just taking a step beyond that and into commenting that there are ways in which there are serious threats to equality and our access to the internet that go way beyond the net neutrality debate, and as technologies like artificial intelligence and others develop and mature, the choices that we make now in a situation of deep complexity and not knowing where things are going, the choices we make will have a huge impact, even 2-3 years down the line, let alone 10 or 20. And it's crucial that we bring people together in a way that we can hear each other and try to understand many of the unintended consequences. Because we sit here in our conversation and we articulate, well, it's like this, or we generalize about this, but actually, in the end, we don't know. We don't know. And actually, the first step is to acknowledge with humility that we don't know, and that there may be some wisdom and truth in others' perspectives around this. So when it comes to net neutrality, my first reaction is, I have a perspective, I have a belief. The way things are going in the US, I think, are dangerous when it comes to letting go of net neutrality. But on the other hand, what I'm trying to grasp onto may also have a lot of deeply damaging unintended consequences. So let's think creatively beyond the polarized, this is good, this is bad perspective. And as I said, that's been a long road for me with nuclear weapons. And when I open up to the possibility that my position has a lot of unintended consequences too, the libertarian approach to net neutrality has a lot of danger associated with it, then we can have a conversation. What is it we're trying to achieve?
Interestingly, Alfred and I were having a chat yesterday about notions of certainty and uncertainty, and you were kind of in the other camp, weren't you?
So I think, I think it's not about, right or wrong, or this is good or this is bad. Observing what is happening, but you have intuitively always an understanding what your role is and what your path is and what you want to do. And when I'm speaking to people, and I had this, or when we had business meetings where people try to convince other people in the politics. You have that all the time. You're trying to come in and arm yourself with arguments and trying to convince the other person. And this is all about I'm winning and you are losing. The question is how can we create an environment where we feel a deep understanding what to do, and how can we create a dialogue where it's not about winning and losing. It's more about trying to learn from each other and finding a solution together. So again, an example, when I was at Google in Dublin has a weather which is changing quite a lot. And we had this I went into a meeting which was a very aggressive meeting. The other party wanted to convince this party, and this party had a different opinion, and so on and so forth. So I came into this meeting and I felt, and if you're looking into yourself, you often have this, you go into a room and you feel, ooh, there's a very aggressive energy in this room, So I said, this is not a good basis to start, a dialogue on this. And fortunately, or maybe not fortunately, maybe by intention, there was sun and rain outside, which created a nice rainbow. So I was looking outside and I said, hey guys, have you seen this rainbow outside? And out of a sudden, these people were no longer thinking about how to convince the other person and their argument. They were looking out of the window, and first of all, they were completely irritated. But then they found, I used this irritation in setting the scene in a different way. That doesn't mean that I can, convince these people immediately, but this has an effect on how people approach certain situations. And to do that is very important. And but to say, there is no right and no wrong doesn't mean that you cannot act and you cannot have a position. You should have a position and act. I often, when it comes to business, I was observing a situation, I think about 5, 6, 7 years ago. There is a pharmaceutical industry or a company in India, Gibraltar. And there was a situation when the American drug companies, pharmaceutical industry, had a drug against AIDS, and they were selling it in America for about $60, and they were selling it in Africa for $600. So in Africa, and they were not willing actually to change that. So in Africa, of course, people even cannot afford $60, but they couldn't afford $600. So this company, Gibraltar, came in and they said, we don't have the patent for that drug, but we're going to infringe that. We're going to do that. And feel free to sue us. We're going to do that, we're going to develop it, and we're going to bring it out and give it to Africa, to this market, for under $1. Just to give them, and I know that the CEO of this company was holding a speech in front of the United Nations, and he said, do it, sue us. But this is the attitude which I think is needed these days, that we need to come across borders, regulation, frameworks, laws, even laws, if we feel this is the right thing to do. And not in an aggressive way, but in a way that you invite people to come in and said, but we know that we need to do this. And there are lots of examples in history where we see that people overcame frameworks where you always said, oh, this is not possible. This will never change. And you have that in companies, and so that people say, oh, it's always the way it is, so that's why we cannot change it. But that is, for me, always the reason why we need to change it. And we have good examples in our world, in every sector, even with pupils, with students, on all generations, people who dare, people who fear, people who think, no, this is not right. We need to do something else. And then not fight against it, fight for something. That is very important, I think.
Can I just...
Because you spoke at the United Nations yesterday, did you? Was it?
Yes, I was briefing the member states at the conference on disarmament and on artificial intelligence and weapons of mass destruction. And the message conveyed at the end was what you mentioned earlier. We need to break silos, because that is very dangerous these days, to have people not able to see the big picture. I just wanted to comment on libertarian and liberalism. If you think back in the early 90s when internet emerged, think about how it was perceived. It was perceived as this platform where freedom, total freedom, would be possible, where anyone will be able to benefit from it. Look at where we are 28 years later. This is one of the most oligopolistic markets that is out there, because you have a first mover advantage or second mover advantage. Maybe if the first one fails, then you learn from its failure and you move in. And they are in a position, this company is in a position that if they have a competitor, what they do, they either set up an internal team to compete with this company, or they buy this company. What they have that you don't have are data. They have the data. Even though you have a fantastic algorithm, you don't have data, and therefore it's very difficult for you to compete. So the point I'm making here is that there was this idea in liberalism, coming from Smith and Ricardo, this invisible hand that the market will regulate itself. Well, that's not really the case. And so in terms of freedom, we have to be careful. If you look at the behavior that we're witnessing on the internet, trolls, for instance, when you leave people behind a desk commenting on articles, look at the tabloids, and you look at the comments, the violence that is displayed in the comments. This is a consequence of total freedom. 2 years ago, I think, Microsoft released a bot called Ty, and basically Ty was fed by comments from people on the internet. They had to switch off Ty less than 24 hours after they put it on, because it had become the most racist and all the bad things you can think of robots in the world. So I think we have to be careful. We have to be careful in terms of this simple thinking that freedom is the answer to everything, because now we have to put safeguards. And again, what we're doing, we are shifting the responsibility of governance from the state to companies. So nowadays, what you have, if you have a picture of a nipple on Facebook, you will be blacklisted. But Facebook is currently being used in Myanmar to actually track and kill Rohingyas. And basically here you have these double standards, and where is the accountability? So I think that we have to be really careful in terms of where are we giving power to. When a guy like Jeff Bezos now has a wealth that is estimated at 45 or 50 billion?
Yeah.
Think about that. This guy has more money than most states in the world. What does it say in terms of accountability and governance? So we move from this old liberal system to a predatory liberal system where companies have to please the shareholders. And that has led to massive problems in terms, for instance, of global warming, in terms of pollution. We know that it's not sustainable the way we're doing it, but because the short-term interest is much stronger than your long-term loss, it's impossible to get out of this cycle. So we need to think about this issue at the global level, and not just states. We need to integrate the civil society. That's very important.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question?
Hey there, Jane. Hi.
Andy. Sorry,
Hey
I can't see you.
So thank you, panel. I do have one thing I want to challenge, which is a tacit opinion that seems to have formed, and also ask a question, which is a very grounded, hopefully real-world question. To explain, I'm an AI practitioner. I own and I'm chief executive of a company that uses a lot of AI, big data, deep learning, machine learning. We're in Gibraltar. We have offices around the world, but we are fundamentally here. We've had the democratization of content through Facebook, this kind of thing. But now we see the democratization of action, as evidenced by Ince. Now,
there is this assumption that only the big companies and the big governments can take action. There's meaningful action. Whereas in reality, due to this democratization process of technology, many, many engineers and companies can use AI. 5 years ago, we didn't know a great deal about it. We're now doing AI and computer vision deployments around the world. We're a small company. Cambridge Analytica, which was mentioned by you guys, very small company, in a small way influenced the outcome of an election. So I don't want us to assume that small companies have no role, given how many of us there are. Mm-hmm. My question is relating the dialogue. So there's a very good comment about we need to act ethically, we need to think holistically, we need to think globally. But there's a very important group that seems to be missed out from that dialogue time and time again. And that's people like me, the engineers, the mathematicians, the physicists. We're not involved in the dialogue. And it's important that we are. And critically, we don't have the training, the education, we don't even have the vocabulary to have the ethical discussion in the way that you guys can. So my question to the panel is, how do you engage with engineers like me and all the engineers I have around the world to say, dude, should you be building that? I know it's cool, but should you be building that? And we've never had to answer that question before. Yeah. How do we engage with my people?
Let's go with Paul. That's a great question.
Yes,
Andy,
okay.
thanks.
So I would answer that by going back in time and looking at my field, because we had in the Cold War two mutually hostile camps brandishing tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. And in that context, the technologists and scientists who were behind the nuclear weapons programs got together, the Americans and the Russians. And they formed an organization called the Pugwash group of scientists that met in Canada first in a little village, a tiny place in the middle of nowhere called Pugwash. Mm-hmm. And they set up this dialogue, this conversation. And you say that the technologists are not schooled in this sort of conversation, but neither were they. But they sat down and they compared notes about how they felt as individuals deep inside the system of the nuclear weapons programs. And that conversation created another layer of dialogue between these two states that were not talking. And they won the Nobel Peace Prize, the Pugwash Institute. My sense today is that this organization, Pugwash, could do exactly a similar sort of activity today around some of the stuff I'm doing around emerging technologies and how they apply to nuclear weapon systems, and the potential for destabilizing what appears to be relatively stable relationships. These guys working on autonomous underwater vehicles are building autonomous underwater vehicles. They know the mission, they know the purpose, but they don't know the bigger, deeper impact. Now, we're looking at creating regular discussion forums for these guys, just applying their curiosity and interest about raising their sights beyond the short-term mission to what the consequences might be and what their opinions are, because their opinions are just as important as people like us who spend all our time thinking about the higher level, because we need to know the detail as well. So that dialogue is really interesting, and that's the sort of model that I would have, is going beyond asking the question that Alfred was talking about, what is the intention? What is the purpose? Because you have your missions, they're fine, that's what you're doing. But actually, you have power, you have influence in the broader system. So how can we operate in ways, how can we ask for help? We've got power, but we want to pull people in who have another perspective. How can we engage and transform the system so that the mission that we have, the second order mission, making money, creating expansion, having a functioning organization, how does that sit in a broader ecology? The broader ecology being society, global society, and where we're going. Because we're human beings and we want to play a constructive, positive role.
Brilliant, thank you.
And I think that's an excellent question. And I wanted to, I mean, there are lots of initiatives, really probably only in the last couple of years, where you're getting technologists coming together. So there's the Centre for Humane Technology, you may be familiar with Tristan Harris, Joytech. There are lots of different ones that are coming together. But I think Gibraltar, because it is a small state, and because of the ability here to kind of see opportunity, I think here is an excellent place to try and build some kind of a forum or a body where people come together to discuss the power that they have available to them. Because, for example, the gaming industry, right, which started here about 20 years ago, now the main gaming industries or the main gaming companies are here, so this place has an ability to draw in organizations that have tremendous power and influence, but concentrated in a very small state. So I think that there is a huge opportunity here to develop a body dedicated to the ethics of technology. Personally.
And if I might have a counter question to you, because you asked the question, how can we be involved in this governance, developing of new governance in this area, and this implies for me that you have a certain understanding and perception how power is working and how our structure is working in this world. So have you thought about to create something locally, because change never happens globally, or very seldom. It started locally with local initiatives. Have you thought about to start something on a local base, connecting with your people here in Gibraltar, connecting then with people somewhere else, to get together, find a common understanding, have a kind of forum, discussing that, bringing that out to the public, increasing awareness of what you see in this world, and inviting others to join this. That is, from my perspective, the real understanding of democracy, isn't it?
I think that you make a very good sort of implied point there. I think the reality is that my company is pretty much the only AI company in this country. Certainly working on the scale that we are. So building something locally is challenging. But I think that, and I point to myself, not necessarily to my engineers who are significantly smarter than I'll ever be, is that to start that dialogue, one has to have the vocabulary. And at the moment, we are wrestling internally with, should we be doing this? Because we're getting approaches from government agencies around the world, some quite scary big ones, liking our technology and wanting to do things. We're involved in hotels and, capturing people, doing facial recognition. And we are starting to ask ourselves these questions, and we don't really have the vocabulary or the intellectual framework to analyze what we're doing, because we're engineers. We've got our head in the ground solving a problem. That's what I've done all my career. And actually asking someone like myself to step up and go, right, I'm going to build a global organization with a coherent purpose to talk about ethical things that, frankly, I can't even articulate properly. I'm much more likely to get my head down, my headphones on, and start coding, because that's what we do. And so we need help, I think. And I think there's probably small companies around the world who also would rather put their headphones on and code.
Jean-Marc. Oh, sorry, who wants to? The floor is open.
Well, no, I was just going to say, you're already a long way further than most people by recognizing the challenge. Don't knock the ability of engineers to think beyond. A lot of the more exciting, open-ended techniques that I was teaching when I was teaching government civil servants originally came from engineering concepts, systems approaches, and all that. Engineering is a hard approach to some extent, but there are elements in which engineering can also open up to the idea of uncertainty and how do you manage that, and that's certainly what I was dealing with.
Yeah, that's a key question, point that you raise, and that's the message I'm trying to convey the last 2 years, that we need to rethink our curriculum, because engineering curriculum are very scientific, are based on hard sciences. And we lost sight of social sciences, human sciences, philosophy, ethics. That's very much in need. I'm sorry, I'm a bit tired. Did I already tell the story at Facebook? I did that this morning, but did I say it here? I didn't know.
No.
Oh, right, okay. So, I'm very sorry. Yeah, in 2010, I helped friends to set up a company in Silicon Valley. And over the summer, I used the time there to go and visit the main companies. I went to Facebook, and I asked people just below Zuckerberg, do you have anyone in your company thinking about the social, political implication of your technology? They look at me like, what are you talking about? So I started to write 2 academic articles about the militarization of social media. They were turned down. It's a non-topic in 2010. 2011, you have the Arab Spring. That shows the aggregating power of social media. And 2014, you have ISIS using social media as a force multiplier, using ultraviolence combined with social media to achieve shock and awe. A few days before Zuckerberg was speaking in front of Congress this year, he made an interview where he said that, had you told me 14 years ago that I would be involved in election fraud, I would not have believed you. And this is, in a way, an example of how tech people are driven by either money, commercial interest, or ego, and especially in academia. Last year, there was a paper that was published in an academic journal that basically gave a way to synthesize, I think, horsepox. Horsepox is very close to smallpox, and so basically you are giving this information away. So because the pressure was leading to publish or perish in academia, you know, people in science are driven by publishing in the best scored high impact factor journals. And at a time where we are dealing with technology that are very transformative and disruptive, now we have to think about is transparency a good thing? Actually, that was a point that was made yesterday by Ambassador Gill who is in charge of this Committee on Lethal Autonomous Weapons System, that nowadays, not every information should be disclosed, because if this information falls in the hands of the wrong guy, we might be in trouble. Don't forget that ISIS is the first non-state actor group that developed chemical programs with its delivery system. They used chemical weapons at least 76 times between 2014 and 2016. We have, they set up a chemical lab where they use human guinea pigs to test thallium. Thallium is a salt that at a very small dose is not lethal, you lose your hair, but at higher dose is completely lethal. Behind that, there's the idea of conducting mass poisoning. So these guys are actually, the bad guys basically, are actually using the knowledge out there. So to return to your question, what we need to train people like we had in the 17th, 18th century, people that are thinking about the world. The so-called polymath. But right now in academia, if you are doing that, you're done. And I'm an example of that. I was trained as a mechanical engineer, physicist, mathematician, then moved into political science and international relations. My attention span is about 5 years. I work on a topic for 5 years. Then after 5 years, I think I got the big pictures. I moved to another one. I have no chance to secure a position at university. And so in science, currently, you only have one discipline that make being a generalist a specialization. This is medicine. When you have a problem, what you do, you first go to your medical practitioner, the generalist, and he will tell you, you have to go to a lung doctor or skin doctor, whatever. But that's the only field. Any other fields, you don't have that. Meaning that people are completely working in silos and they don't see the big pictures. And what we should value is the ability of people to connect the dots. Yeah. But currently, the academic system is not promoting that kind of thinking. And this is quite worrying.
Let me build on that,
right.
Mark. I think you know, we need to help people not only to thinking, but to get a connection to their intuition. You know, Einstein, he said, you know, our intuition is a sacred gift, and our cognitive ability is its servant. And we have created a society which is honoring the servant and forget about the gift. And that is exactly so. You know, when you meet people like Zuckerberg, and you meet people like Larry Page and Sergey Brin and Bezos and these folks, intellectually brilliant people. In certain areas, very highly developed, you know, cognitive ability, understanding, analytic skills, and really also creative. And some of them are also speaking lots of languages, you know, also in other fields, are very well educated. But that's a horizontal kind of education. What these people, if you're looking at their personal development, where are they on their personal development? Which is a vertical kind of thing. They are not very well developed in all of the areas. And that is why, you know, they're reacting how they're reacting, and they're using the tools, which is their intellectual capacity and their cognitive abilities, in this particular area where they think this is the right thing to do. If you're speaking to Larry and to Sergey, they want to save the world. They definitely want to do this. And they think they're doing the right thing to do this. So I stopped saying, you know, this is the right guys and these are the wrong guys. They are bad and they are good. I just observing that is where they are. What I think is what they're lacking is certainly a kind of, you know, an empathy, a skill of empathy, a skill of connecting to themselves. A friend of mine, he once said, it's a French person who in the 60s decided to become a monk in Tibet, Mathieu Ricard. He said, you know, Alfred, you know, a psychopath can be very empathetic, but he certainly is not compassionate. And here is what we're talking about. We're talking about skills on the horizontal, and we're talking about the personal development skills and the level of where people are. And I think this is something which is underestimated by politics, it's underestimated by all our education system right now, because we're only training, you know, the cognitive abilities and skills. And this are all kind of what has we created? We have created a world where we have environmental problems. We have 8 people who have more financial assets than the bottom 50% of our world population, so 8 against 3.5 billion people. We have created in our industrialized societies a society which increasing suicide rate and depression rate. That is what we have created with this kind of thinking, with this kind of approach. And brilliant people were, you know, here and there, even in the government. So if you say, you know, this is one part of it, yes, but this is really not the whole part of it. We need to train people and give them the ability, not to train people, but give them the ability to understand who they are from their own kind of personal development. I think that is very crucial.
Brilliant. I think we probably have a couple more questions. It's been a fantastic session. Is there a question
Cecilia.
down the front?
Cecilia,
down the front here.
Thank you very much. It's absolutely fascinating. If I could pick up on the idea of how do we, I spoke a couple of nights ago about maybe a clumsy and overly simplistic transition between the industrial and the information age, and some of the issues that we need to keep in equilibrium as we go through that democracy, autocracy, monetary value as opposed to human principle value, and all those things that I think are getting a little bit, should we say, bent out of shape, and there's a whole situation of disequilibrium. And I sort of made the contention that it was about getting the balance between personalization, to use that term, and humanitarianism, to use that term, in terms of how we manage self-rights, individual rights, and sort of collective responsibilities. So if you broadly buy in, and I think you do as a panel, in that those are some of the issues there. I sense that some of you are more on one side than the other, but you know, I think it's broadly there. If I would be so forthright to suggest that. But the question I'd ask is, going back to the governance and how do we manage that transition? How do we manage those and points of balance and make sure they go right from a governance perspective, from a political perspective, and an institutional perspective? Because I suspect you engage, and Jean-Marc, you were in the UN. How do these institutions and governance mechanisms need to evolve as we go forward? Thank you.
Who would like to?
Well, I'll kick off only to say
You're
I have no idea. As a politician at the top of a tiny little institution, well, not that small, I guess. Our city was 4 or 5 times the size of Gibraltar, but nevertheless, it still felt small and insignificant. Pulling levers of power and them going nowhere. I felt the answer. That I am increasingly feeling that the answer to your question is not so much how do I or my institution maintain control, but how do we pull organizations and individuals into a collective conversation about how power, which is distributed, can be managed. Power is there. I have no time for people who say we need to just destroy power, because power is there, and power is about empowering. It's about bringing people together. So my judgment now, what is it, 12, 13 years on from from leaving the political system, is the challenge that I am trying to come to grips with is how we can transform the way politics is done so that people see this as an opportunity wherever they sit, whether they are a governor or whether they are a private sector or whether they are individuals. How do we create a system where people feel included and part of the decision-making process? So, and that is not just about elections. And I guess this is where Gibraltar has an advantage, because it's small. It's possible to bring people together in these conversations in an open way, where people are not aligned to a particular political ideology or just having the hat of being a CEO of a tech company. You're also together as citizens of this rock and have a shared interest. It's more obvious at this level, but nevertheless, this is the challenge we have globally: is how to evolve our political systems that are broken, although frankly they've never been perfect, and that there is a danger of seeing a golden age and things are now going to hell in a handbasket. Of course, this is about not coming to an ideal world. This is about nudging and moving in the right sort of direction. But I don't know. I don't know the answer.
And I think none of us know, right? No. None of us know. But I think as well, probably, I think the answer will always be education. But that's a very long process. So if we're starting, if we're starting to become alive to the issues that we face, and we're starting to educate from maybe from primary school up, then possibly in 25 years' time, we might have people entering positions of power who are more whole and complete than we currently have. But I think we have to probably consider that the timelines are longer than we would like. We're used to everything being immediate, and there will be a solution next year and that kind of thing. And I just don't. That's not realistic. I think. I think as we identify the problems that we have now, and we seed change through education, then probably it won't be our lifetime, my lifetime, but probably.
I think education is certainly very important, but I think there are also, what is education? And what are we aiming for is not a status quo, which we want to achieve, and from there on, it's static and everything is wonderful. That's not what life is about. Life is about a floating evolutionary process. So the question is, what can I do now? as a politician to change it. You know, in Stanford University, a year ago, so I spoke with one of the professors 2 years ago, with one of the professors who said to me, look, Alfred, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And Americans have always a good way to phrase things. But what that means is in political organizations and in business organizations, that in former times you had a strategy which was built for the next 5 or 10 years. You had a strategy team who were sitting in a room, you know, with experts coming together, building something for half a year, writing it down, and then it was signed, it was booked in a book, and the book was handed over to the people, and then based on that, the structure and the organization and the objectives and KPIs were defined. Nowadays, since we have a continuous change in our societies, you know, that doesn't work anymore. So what you need is to strengthen the culture. But what is culture? So culture is how we interact with each other. How can we do that? So what you mentioned, what you did is this active listening kind of exercise is one thing. What you concretely do, it seems tiny thing, but the tiny thing can have a tremendous effect on the whole system. Also, you know, what I think the German government, the GIZ, once initiated together with the Presencing Institute and the Eileen Fisher Foundation in Boston, Massachusetts, and New York. What they did is they founded a global well-being lab, which means they brought people together from all over the world, from different areas. You know, there were politicians, there were people who were heading NGOs, there were people from family offices, there were CEOs from companies, there were politicians in there. So we came together, 35 or 30 people, and on different places on this world, and we experienced, you know, what does it mean and what will happen if we bring these people together who had no connection whatsoever, coming from different cultures, and focusing on, okay, what are the problems in this world? And how can we locally address that, which has an effect, and how can we create locally a network of local living economies, so of people who are locally changing systems and then have an effect on the overall system. So that is something which you can do, you know, immediately. And out of this, what came out is this a We7 meeting in Edinburgh, which I would love to invite Gibraltar to be part of, as well, to really come together as politicians and learn from each other. And not only politicians and policymakers, but bringing in artists, bringing in scientists, bringing in, you know, spiritual leaders, bringing in students, asking questions, and having this moment, creating this moment where you initiate conversations, but not only conversations, but also experience the way that when we're going to be together, something happens. And this is happening not only on a cognitive way, it's happening on an emotional way. And if we meet on a personal level, on a heart-to-heart base, you know, much more is possible than only if we have positions and statements and, you know, research. That is then supporting that, which then came out of it. Then we need science and research and all this kind of thing. But I think to bring this together, and it's very concrete. You can break it down and say, this is what we do tomorrow, this is what we do next month, this is what we do the next year. And that is what I encourage you, or would, you know, would hope that a lot of these kind of innovative people and creative people who are in the government right now were considering and doing that.
Thank you, Arjun.
Yeah, I'd be a bit more pessimistic on this. It has to do with, you have a structural problem. You have to differentiate between political system, democracy versus authoritarian states. In democracies, politicians are elected on a 4 to 5 year cycle. So basically, to be elected, you have to appeal to your constituent. To appeal to your constituent, you have to address the concrete problems. And therefore, to plan for issues that you know might have detrimental impact in the future is very difficult. We all know that we're going straight in a world with global warming, with pollution. But now if you say to your constituent that you will double the price of petrol in order to get more taxes, in order to favor environmental policies, so that your grandchildren will live in a better world, You have no chance of being elected. Whereas in an authoritarian state, government doesn't have to deal with the issue of election and re-election. Look at what happened in China. Okay, China has last year, in July, they have said that by 2030 they will be leading in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. 2 months later, you have Xi Jinping has transformed the Chinese constitution, and he will be the president of China until he dies. So, in an authoritarian state, what you can do is you can plan for a very long time, which you can't, or it's very difficult to do in a democracy. So then you have to question how you can fix that problem. And this is not easy because, again, you are fighting against your short-term interest versus the long-term loss or gain. And this is a structural problem. Last week, I was briefing member of parliaments in Switzerland about this effect of technology. I think concrete step that could be taken is first raising awareness. Most people have absolutely no clue about where we are these days in terms of technology. For most people, this tool here is a phone. It's not. It's a computer. And the people don't understand how it works in terms of security. You will never leave your house, the door opens and the windows open, but you are exactly doing that with this device. And on this device, what you do your banking transaction, you put your pictures, you have a private conversation, okay, all things that are very confidential to you. So there is a need for education, but there is also a need for foresight. And we need to invest in people that are able to think about what will happen and the consequences of this technology. I give you the example of Uber. Uber has a completely disruptive model. And European governments had to take position on that. So some government, like the Italians, said, okay, we adopt the kill switch approach, we ban Uber because it's unfair competition with traditional taxi industry. Fine. Most governments do not do that. What they do, they develop a legislation to actually increase taxes for Uber or putting more barriers so that we are leveling the playing field between the traditional taxi industry and Uber. In Geneva, for instance, up until a year and a half ago, you would take a normal taxi and you take Uber, you would pay half the price. With Uber, and the service would be much better. It wouldn't stink cigarettes, and people would be friendly. So the people in Geneva, they try to increase, they've done it, they increase the barrier of entry. But the time it takes in democracy for this legislation to be active is a few months or even sometimes a few years. By the time this legislation enters into force, Uber will have evolved to its next model, which is no longer having a driver behind the car, but autonomous car. And so your legislation, when it enters into force, will be already obsolete. Why? Because the technology that we're facing grow exponentially. But our thinking and the policy making grow linearly, which means that the more time passes, the more the delta increases and you become irrelevant. That's why you need to have foresight. You need people are able to think. And that's why you need not just engineers, you need artists. More and more I'm participating in panels with people doing science fiction and movies. At the GCSP, we have free position for writers and artists, because you have to think outside the box. And you have to think, most people in AI now take the ideas from the movie industry. Yeah. This is setting the stage. So we need to understand where technology is going in order to mitigate the potential impact of this technology. There are some studies that have been done. The Oxford Martin School in the UK, 77% of jobs in China might be at risk because of robotization, about 40% in Europe. If that ever materializes, you can get rid of an entire social system. If 40% of your population is unemployed, you have to completely rethink the way we will interact. And this will have tremendous implications.
Yeah.
So you need to have people in government that think about this issue. The problem is that, again, governments are addressing concrete short-term problems, and most of the time they don't think ahead.
Great.
And that is wonderful. You know, last year I held a speech in Germany because, you know, we had all this kind of, you know, speeches where politicians come up and saying, you know, who will be needed in the future economy based on the projection of robotization and of, you know, this. And I was standing in front of this poster and I was saying, that is the wrong question.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, which economy do we want in the future? That is the right question.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about, you know, I think you're right, we need to have people to have an understanding of it. But not an understanding how do we prevent something we project the status quo in the future. Mm-hmm. We need people who understand in which world do we want to live in, what kind of economy do we want to have in the future. And if, you know, we have a redundancy of people, we never have a redundancy of people. Everybody is valuable in this world. That is something we have to understand, and if we do that, we're creating a world which is really on this basis. Some people might call me naive, and yeah, I'm happy to be that, because that is creativity and innovation. That is where we need to go, and not saying, okay, be realistic, Alfred. I said, what is it, realistic?
Yeah.
Is realistic that we're pedaling and we create more efficiency in pedaling against the cliff? Or is it more realistic to thinking about an alternative way where we want to go? I think that is more realistic. That is the thing what we need to have. In every kind of institutions, organizations, companies, we need to have this thinking. When I was talking, you know, a year ago to the board of BMW, or part of the board of BMW, you know, and I said to them, what is your company tomorrow when you stop producing cars? They were quiet. Or like, we don't know. I said, that's interesting. You guys are existing since 100 or more years. You have intercultural knowledge and experience. You have production experience, you know, you have technology experience. You have all this kind of soft assets, which you say is nothing worse if you don't produce a car. Let's think about what a car stands for. It stands for mobility. So what does mobility mean? How do we use it, and how do we want that? How is this, you know, complementary? What kind of new thing can arise when we create something as mobility? And this is the questions which we need to dare also on the politician side to have that for the future. And, you know, democracy, yes, has its limitation when it comes to you want to be elected in the future. If that is your intention as a politician, then you're right. I don't want those politicians. I want politicians who go there and be politicians because they think this is what I want to do, regardless this has been done in 10 years, in 15 years. You said, Alfred, you are naive. Maybe I am. But then I said, we are in the wrong system. We need people to stand for something they believe in, regardless of they be re-elected or not re-elected. I don't really care, because this is what I really want. This is my integrity. This is my intention. This is what I'm fighting for, what I'm standing for. Are you getting up in the morning and saying, oh, how can I save my job? No. You're getting up and saying, what can I do to contribute to a better world? This is what I need to do.
Well, Trump was elected on that. His plan and ideas were very straightforward, and he's applying this. So in a way, you know, this is the kind of politicians that you can end up with.
Yes, I agree.
You know,
and that is what we can learn from Trump. What we can learn from Trump is really that he addresses the underlying unconscious beliefs of the people. That is what he did. If we understand that, and you know, I don't think the consequences in what he is doing is the right thing to do, but understanding on a deeper level where people are, and not saying you are bad people or you are good people, but understanding and involving them, acknowledging people, seeing where they are, trying to create places where you involve them and not just marginalize them. What you know, by all respect, Hillary Clinton did, and these kind of system. So for me, it's not, and that is, you know, to look at things not in black and white. Oh, he's a bad guy, they're a good guy. Seeing, oh, what did he do? What kind of effect did that have? Why was he impactful? And what can we learn from that? You know, and that is, I think, more the attitude, what is needed.
And it's not about seeing things black and white. It's, again, look at facts. If you read Piketty's studies on the evolution of our economic system, we have basically killed, or we are about to kill the middle class. So what we're creating is a privileged class, a tiny, tiny few, super rich, and the middle class, most of it, is going down. What Trump was doing was addressing these people, white trash, in the US, that, okay, make America great again, meaning we will provide you a job by bringing back jobs that are lost against the German cars, against the Chinese. That's what he is doing. But that kind of situation, you know, this bipolarization of society leads in a democratic societies to the election of extremist parties, because the extremist parties will play on these spheres. And this is something that we should really think about in terms of where we're heading. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's the Maslow pyramids of needs. Every individual is, you know, has to fulfill certain basic needs. The first need things that you have to do is breathe, eat, and drink. When you reach that, then you want security, and then you can move the ladder up to a state where you don't have to worry about this basic needs, but you can start to think about the world as we're doing now here. Okay, we think about democracy and the future, but if you think about these basic pyramids of needs, it's as when we went to Iraq, the Americans, and doing counterinsurgency. What you have to understand is when you live in Baghdad or Mogadishu or wherever, and when you leave your house in the morning and you're not sure that in the evening you'll be back home and you'll see your family because they might be killed, you're not thinking about democracy or what will be your footprint in the future. What you're thinking about is just surviving. So I think we need to prevent the current dynamics to continue, because again, a guy like Jeff Bezos having more wealth, I mean, most people in the world will not make in their lifetime what Bezos makes in 1 minute in terms of wage. I mean, the system is broken, you know, and democracy empowers the mass. So if the mass is frustrated, it will go and elect the people that appeal to them. And we've seen that in the past.
Thank you. I think we're going to finish up soon because we've just been... Oh, there's another question from Annette. Okay.
What you said. Because of the community that I belong to, a lot of them are in the States. And because it's a democratic community, even though we have a common goal, there are people I know who bought squirrels in their collations, who voted Trump, and there are people who are intellectuals who are, from the other side. And I get to see their conversations on Facebook regarding politics. I don't get involved because it's not my politics, but it's extremely interesting to see how the conversation between the two sides are developing. Now, they all have a common goal, and the common goal is to cure their children. Trump is now getting to a position where he's going to actually make decisions on not allowing these people, and amongst others, access to certain medical facilities. The ones who said at the beginning, Trump's going to do this, are saying, look, this is now happening. The ones who said it wasn't going to happen and said, how dare he? You're not right, I'm right, I voted for him. And if I voted for him and we have a common policy, which is our children, he's in for it. Now, it's only a small community, but if the more he gets involved with actually interfering in people's lives, the more people are going to say, not that they were wrong in voting for him, but I voted for you to do these things for me, and and you're actually going against your word. So
Yeah.
you're out.
Yeah.
But you know what I found interesting? I was in the pre-election time. We were in America, and I spoke to people. That's one of our hobbies. You know, I'm speaking to old people about what they think. You know, taxi drivers, toilet cleaners, CEOs. You know, whatever, whoever comes across. And it was so interesting that I spoke with people who are obviously voting for Trump, and I said, why? And they gave me an argument. And I countered this argument immediately and said, you know, and they found, oh, yeah, it's a mistake, but I'm still voting for Trump. So I was like, okay, what I understood out of it is, okay, it's not about the words, you know, to convince people with an argument. It's about to understanding on a deeper level, why are these people feel attracted by such kind of people? So, and they were, and Trump is a phenomenon which is not out of a sudden there. It had been created through a process. And it came to a point where we have this, what you just mentioned, inequality, which is consciously or unconsciously perceived by people in our societies. And they didn't find answers for somebody else. So they think, oh yeah, somebody who is breaking the rules, you know, we need to get this person. They didn't hear what he was saying. And he himself, he said, you know, I could kill a person on Times Square, you know, and they would even vote for me. And I was like, okay, when we are living in such a society, it's not about, okay, we have to provide, you know, people like Trump coming in. Yes, maybe. But we have to see what is the underlying system which made him possible to come to this position. And how can we change that system? That is much more important. That is the underlying question for me. I haven't found an answer yet. But I think, you know, there are a lot of ingredients, what we spoke, you know, about, which we have to address, I think, to do that.
Just to conclude, because you are actually opening a new, I mean, we could start a new panel, but now what you're referring to is, I recommend you to read Henry Kissinger's latest essay in the Atlantic Journal magazine, and actually lecture on that for the last 6 months. I should have written it because now Kissinger stole this idea. But we are witnessing the end of the Enlightenment eras. Our entire system are being fact-based, on rationality. And our idea in politics is that, you know, the example that you gave when Trump said, okay, we will build a wall with Mexico, it will cost $4 billion. And then some people went to its electorate and did the math, you know, and it will turn out that it will cost between 10 to 15 billion. They say, okay, this is what Trump told you, this is what it will cost. Will you change your position? No. So basically we move beyond convincing people based on facts to convincing people based on a belief. And this is a complete change of the way you have to do politics and the way our system of governance are working. And here you have lots of opportunities for things going wrong. Why? Because if it's no longer fact-based, but on your feeling and emotion, then you might empower those that are basically speaking the loudest.
We haven't even got onto fake news or anything,
Exactly.
have we? But it's not.
As a politician, I would tell you it's always been like that.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I think that we're going to wrap up, and it's been an absolutely thought-provoking, brilliant, humbling for me to be part of this panel. So let's thank Paul Ingram, the lovely Jane Murray, Alfred Tolle, and Jean-Marc Rickley. Thank you so much. We'll see you tonight at the St. Michael's Cave for the concert, and thanks to Jan Delgado there for this brilliant BrightMed.